Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Crypto News Podcast. It's your host, Matt Zeha. We are buzzing as always. And folks, holy crap, are we ever poor. Whatever you do, do not look at your portfolio. Do look at CoinGecko. Do look at CoinMarketCap. There are some great buying opportunities. Everything is on sale. It's pretty much a big BOGO. Buy one, get one. I'd be hammering the green button, guys. I don't think we're going to go that much lower, maybe a little bit more pain, but we have some really good prices right now. And whatever you do, just do not check the portfolio. I did it earlier this week. I have the mental number in my head. It's not good. I'm sure our guest, who we're going to get into in 1 minute, probably not good for him either, but keep on grinding and we're going to get through this, guys. Time for the intro. Today, we have the one and only Dominic Schwenter on the show today. The COO of Lisk, the layer 2 blockchain dedicated to bringing Web3 adoption and emerging markets back to Ethereum. He is a blockchain tech vet and has positioned himself as a thought leader in the industry, contributing to numerous initiatives, projects, and solutions. He is dedicated to advancing the adoption of blockchain tech with a specific focus in emerging markets, which we absolutely love to see. His contributions continue to shape the future of decentralized finance and tech, making him a key figure in the digital revolution. Dominic, welcome to the show, my friend. Pumped to have you on, and thanks for coming on last minute here. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Matt, and nice to be on the show and looking forward to a conversation today.
Can't wait to get into Lisk, but first we got to talk about the market. This is pretty bad. I mean, I don't think anyone really expected us to sort of rip this hard in a downward and red direction.
Yeah.
It's been a little weird. I mean, you saw a lot of the guys on Twitter, Ansem, who does call a lot of stuff. He did call this. A couple of the big dogs called this, but like the spooky thing that I see, Dominic, is every day, you know, whether it's sort of Market Watch or Watch Guru or any of those sort of just big news accounts that only just post market action, you're seeing like BlackRock sends 100 million in Bitcoin and ETH to Coinbase, and it's like you have Pump Funds sending millions in Solana every day. It's just like, what's going on here? Like, do you have any clue about why we're just offloading the bags here?
One thing you learn after being in the space for a long time is not to worry too much about any shorter term price movement, right? I think sometimes we're right in terms of where we think it's going to go, but often we're surprised by kind of the shorter term price action, whether it's to the upside or to the downside. You know, personally speaking, like I'm a big believer in the fact that like overall crypto markets are kind of very tied to global liquidity situation. And if you look at that, it kind of has not come into play yet. It's probably expected to come in later this year, especially as large countries like the United States, China, Canada, others all try to renew the debt payments on their sovereign debt. Usually when that happens, you know, interest rates go lower, they infuse some liquidity back into the system. So again, like if you listen to kind of the macro heads and the people who really understand what happens in that space, they still expect that to happen. Just obviously also in the US with Trump, we know from his first term in office that, you know, he likes to have markets rolling well. And I think, you know, it's probably a little bit of a different situation this time just because, you know, he knows this is his last 4 years in office and there's some things he wants to do and maybe he's a little bit more patient around it. But obviously, you know, in the US, there's midterms already in 18 months, 2 years that people start talking about. And so he, you know, I know that I would think that he's going to do what it takes to the environment for markets to do well. And I do expect that to happen. Again, I just don't know when that's going to happen. It could still be a few months of pain here ahead of us. But I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is that we're still kind of, inflation is still running high and it just hasn't become timely enough yet for these governments to really start looking at changing the economics around the interest rates and things like that for their own benefit.
Good point. Yeah, it is true. Trump, I mean, that guy's got such an ego. Like he loves rolling around and being like, you see those markets? I made those rip. Like he loves that shit.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I really hope he does continue to do that. Before we get into Lisk, let's talk about the sort of ETH and the Ethereum Foundation.
Yeah.
Like over the last, heck, I even want to say it's been longer than a year, Dominic. It's probably been like 18 months where a lot of incredible guests like yourselves who obviously are tied into, you know, Ethereum come on and you guys always bring the noise, a lot of positive stuff, but then like everyone just loves shitting on ETH right now. Like you go to Twitter, you go to X, and like it's literally just slander everywhere, left, right, and center, just throwing shit on the Ethereum wall. Why is that? Like, why is there such negative sentiment towards Ethereum right now, besides the fact that the price hasn't done what people want it to do? Like, why is ETH such a punching bag?
We could do 4 hours just on that topic, right? Like, I mean, so one thing is that like Ethereum's always been a punching bag, right? I think going back to like even the 2017, 2018 bull market, you know, I think there was already like a lot of naysayers that were like, oh, this, whatever, it's never going to scale. And, they're trying to be too decentralized, and Cosmos or whoever else was Lisk was coming up at that time. Like, there's going to be these Ethereum killers. To be honest though, I think what it comes down to is there's a few things. One, I think is that, we as a space, we do too much infighting, right? And it comes from the nature of what we've created, in the sense that, like, everything is public. People have raised huge valuations around their projects. It's kind of inherently communal, as in terms of like the communities and people holding tokens and wanting their bags to do better. And so you create these like kind of, short-term sighted rivalries and ways of speaking about other projects, when in the reality, like, we haven't really done a ton globally in terms of Web3 adoption. And so like what we should be doing is working together. So I think it's just, again, like, that's the nature of the space. I think some of it was, friendly competition / like initially Bitcoin versus Ethereum, or Ethereum versus kind of the main alt competitors. But I think, yeah, so I just think like that's the nature of our space. And so there will always be that, because people are kind of self-interested and they're wanting their bags to do better. And so they'll talk badly about other projects. I think that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of it, which is probably the more important one and kind of the more interesting topic here, is that, I really think that what Ethereum's trying to do is very revolutionary and unique in terms of an organization, and a technological organization for sure, right? Like, I've worked in tech, I've worked in Web3, I've worked for nonprofits. I've never seen anybody trying to kind of hold these high level values as strongly as Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation.
That's a good point.
And especially in terms of building a tech product, right? And so that in itself will always bring a lot of ridicule. It'll also bring doubt from investors, right? Like, I think, again, even many years ago, there was a real question of like, okay, we understand that like Web3 is decentralized technology, but if you're going to really build this with like this ethos of like letting the community contribute on different aspects, and not really having, you have Vitalik, but he tries to defer a lot of his say when he can. And like, just making decisions like that and running a tech startup is like, those are never things that are advised, right? Like, if you look at tech startups to do well, it's like the founder and the kind of leadership team is able to adapt quickly, pivot quickly, execute quickly.
Yeah.
They don't need to input from their whole team or the industry. They just do it and they just execute quicker. And so like, I think fundamental structures of how Ethereum's been built, allows for a lot of criticism or skepticism, because it's just so unorthodox. And to be honest, I think like that's the thing that people are missing right now, right? Like, I think the fact that we are, close to 10 years after Ethereum launched, and at least 8 years after it really started becoming kind of known in the Web3 space, the fact that it's still thriving, and whether, you say maybe Solana's catching up, or it's still one of the top, right? And it's, besides Bitcoin, it's the only one that has credible neutrality, which is a big thing, right? Like, if what we're trying to build with Web3 technology is kind of these really decentralized platforms that you can build on top of and you can trust in a decentralized manner, like Ethereum really has that much more so than any other layer one blockchain. And so, to be honest, again, the fact that we're this far into it and there's so many competitors who have tried to take them off the horse, and just because of the nature of how they were building it and the approach to values, and the fact that we're still like, again, like, I think it should be celebrated. Like, I talked about that recently on a, kind of an op-ed I wrote for Cointelegraph. But I think, people are looking at it, it's a unique thing that's being built, and it's kind of very unorthodox. And so there will be a lot of skepticism, and that's kind of part of it. I think that's part of it. And now we can talk about, if you'd like, kind of what's happening currently and the transition that's needed. But I think overall, like, that's where the criticism comes from. And I think, I think in part, like, whether it's the Ethereum Foundation or Vitalik himself, I think part of it's been done on purpose, right? I think part of this skepticism and like doing things in a different way has been done in a specific way to keep certain people out, right? Or like to not encourage them to like feel like they want to be part of this.
No, that's a great point. Talk to me about it. I should know this. I literally recorded the weekly roundup yesterday. Who's the new CEO? What's her name?
Oh no, they haven't decided yet.
I thought.
Aya's stepping down.
Oh, I thought Aya's like she's no longer. I thought she stepped down and is now like running the show.
No, she was the managing executive director, I think it's what she was called, and now she's gonna stay with Ethereum and become the president.
Gotcha.
But it's kind of like a lower level position. But I think that, so they're still waiting to select a new one. But I think it says a few things, right? I think like, one, it says like the fact that she's staying, I think again, illustrates this point that there's nobody really else doing something like this. And if you're really committed to the mission of decentralized technology and building it kind of with these ethos and staying true to that. Like there's not really many other places to go. So that's kind of a cool thing to see.
Yeah.
I think the bigger thing too here is that I think we back to kind of what I was talking about before is that if you look at the history of Ethereum till now, you could say that that was kind of getting through the existential crisis period of what Ethereum was. Like, I mean, could they migrate to proof of stake? Could they kind of keep off all these competitors that popped up? I don't know what the number of competitors have been in the L1 space, but there's been a lot of them.
Yeah.
And could they get to scaling, right? And I think they've done all of that. And the L2s now, which is what we build, but like that's now unlocked scaling, right? And there's going to be more things that come in terms of scaling, but it's really unlocked the door there. And it's clear in the space in terms of all the L2s that are launching and also all the teams that are choosing to launch L2s, right? If you have people, even like ourselves or Base or Sony, like if they come at the space and they go like, should I build an L1 or should I build an L2 on top of Ethereum? And all these really talented teams are saying, it makes like the L2 is what you want to do at this point. Like just trust in that, right? Even if some of the metrics aren't quite there yet, or even if Solana's making a lot of noise, like trust these very talented, experienced teams being like, look, we understand we could do something different, but we're choosing to build L2 because we think that's the best long-term solution for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in terms of like, I think, the fact that scaling has now come about, it allows for kind of, we've always thought this, and that's why we wanted to launch into layer 2 is we think it allows for the end goal of Ethereum to really start playing out, right? Like Ethereum was always designed to be the layer that kind of, everything sits on top of, right? To just be the trust layer sitting underneath everything. And now that's finally possible. And I think that's also where this comes in, right? I think like just from my perspective on things, like I think this is where like a shakeup in the foundation's leadership is necessary. And I think it's just a healthy thing, right? I think if you look at any startup or
100%,
oftentimes there's a period where like the founder or, the executive team needs to get changed because we've just gone through a certain stage and now we need to bring in a new team that's just a little bit more aptly positioned for this kind of next phase of growth. And I think you're going to see that because I think some of the things that I've seen is, obviously because there are so many talented teams building on top of Ethereum and building infrastructure, right? So whether it's all the L2, basically all the L2s, right? So, but also the ZK guys, whether it's Starknet or ZK Sync, there becomes this need to really start to ensure collaboration between all of them. Obviously, we're doing that in the Superchain, but like there's a lot more L2s that are outside of the Superchain. And so, for one thing that I see is that I think like Vitalik's looking for leadership that can kind of ensure that these values and the collaboration between these different ecosystems, even whether it's Arbitrum and Optimism or Polygon, and that these guys work together to scale Ethereum as a whole and use kind of the same standards underlying the technology and interoperability so that everybody can benefit from it. I think that's a big thing. And I think that's kind of where the leadership chain comes in.
Well said. Yeah. Passing off the torch is, we've seen it thousands, if not, hundreds of thousands of times. It's got to happen. And yeah, it's just tough because I still think ETH is the second big dog for a reason. And it's just so weird because in the industry we're in, and obviously you and I are in this industry, so we're biased, but I don't know any other industry where like the qualitative sentiment matters as much as in crypto. Like in TradFi, it's like, yeah, the sentiment matters, but like people look at like the quant more than the qual, it's like They look at the numbers and everything, where in crypto, like the sentiment really does matter. Dominic, you're on a roll here. We are going to jump right into Lisk, but until then, we need to take a quick break and give a huge shout out to our sponsor of the show, that is PrimeXBT. We love the team at PrimeXBT as they offer a robust trading system for both beginners and professional traders. It doesn't matter if you're a rookie or a vet, you can easily design and customize your layouts and widgets to best fit your trading style. PrimeXBT is also running an exclusive promo for listeners of the Crypto News podcast. Use the promo code CryptoNews50. That's CryptoNews50, all one word, to receive 50% of your deposit credited to your trading account. Again, that is CryptoNews50 to receive 50% of your deposit credited to your trading account. And back to the show with Dominic. Let's jump right into Lisk here. Super, you guys have just done incredible work. And one of my favorite things about you guys is focusing on emerging markets and high growth markets. Now, this is something that, and again, I've told this story so many times since I was in Argentina in Q4 last year, but that was the first place I've been where I've really seen like legit crypto adoption, where it's like, restaurants have like a little tether sign on the friggin' window. There was an empanada shop that we used to hit all the time. Also, empanadas, guys, absolutely all world, but an incredible empanada shop. You roll in, the guy's got like his little, pulls up his phone and you literally just boom, tether, you're dancing. It's absolutely incredible. These guys, their currency is so bad, they literally want as soon as they get paid, they transfer it over to Tether and hold it because their currency drops by, sometimes 10% in a month. It's insane. Give me the TLDR, give me the elevator pitch on Lisk, and sort of tie that into why you guys decided to focus on emerging markets so much, which I absolutely love.
Okay, yeah. So Lisk has been around for a long time building infrastructure in the space, right? So, and I think the vision that we've always had is how do we help democratize access, right? This is going to be a long-term road to real adoption across the globe. And so how do we help, whether it's users or whether it's builders, how do we just kind of help make accessing the technology and the tools better, right? And so that was always our vision. With the L2, I think what ended up happening was, look, we see a few things happening. Like I talked about kind of the end goal of Ethereum, right? Like that's possible now. We also see like with the Superchain, which is really interesting, right? Is like that, well, you could say like this, infrastructure layers are becoming commoditized, right? Like you can kind of just spin up an L2 now without a lot of, you still have to pay for a RAS provider or whatever, but it's not, you don't have to build it from scratch. Like we built a layer 1 from scratch, but like you don't have to do that anymore. So what that allows, what that allows is obviously thousands of L2s, hundreds of thousands, we'll see. And so what's interesting about the Superchain is that like it kind of harks back to the original ethos of Web3, right? Which is like, it kind of touches on a lot of what we've been talking about today. Like, there's a lot of noise in the space. There's a lot of projects, there's a lot of layers, but really like we keep competing over the same projects, the same developers, the same users. And in the end, if you look at like our market share versus other large industries in the world, like we're very small, right? Like we have not really gotten global adoption at all yet. And so,
100%.
and I think the big idea behind the Superchain, and it's cool to see all these people joining it now, is that, like instead of building like our own siloed ecosystems, let's build together, let's contribute some of the revenue we generate back to the collective, and let's share the kind of the tools that are built, the infrastructure that's built. Let's allow with interoperability, let's align on infrastructure setup so that we can really prioritize the industry's first native interoperability and what that will unlock for apps, users, chains, everybody. And let's do that so that we can move the space forward. Because if we can move the space forward successfully, then everybody wins, right? And it's kind of like this positive sum mentality, which is refreshing and kind of was the original ethos of Web3 of like, let's build open source. Let's kind of like, it's more important that we bring people on chain than that we're, making a ton of money from, our project that we launched. So when we were deciding to build the L2, I think what became clear was a few things, right? So like with interoperability in the Superchain, a number of things are going to happen, right? So one is that like chains can, for the first time, become much more niche oriented, let's say, in terms of the markets they focus on, without sacrificing for their community and the builders and the apps kind of access to a global network, right? Like before there had been some kind of, whether it was an L2, but it's siloed, or L1s that were like really focused on very specific things. And like those things never really took off because either, again, as an application, you have to think, well, maybe, this kind of fits my narrative more or my market, and maybe there'll be some other apps that kind of I can tie into, but like I don't have the global user base, I don't have the global liquidity. And so is it really that attractive, right? And so the Superchain kind of will likely be the place that gets unlocked first, where because of interoperability, you can kind of allow, we can be super focused on high growth markets and put all our effort there, but the apps building on us can still tap into liquidity on Base or the user base on Optimism mainnet, right? And so it's like a totally different dynamic, right? And so we saw that coming, and so we were like, okay, let's narrow our focus. And from the time we've been building the space, just for a long time, we had always seen that, the adoption numbers and the use case, the real use case, as you were talking about in Argentina, were always much more interesting and much more pressing in markets like Argentina or in Africa or Southeast Asia, right? And so we had seen the builders in our ecosystem building the most interesting use cases for years already in that. And so it was very clear, like we were like, okay, if we choose what we want to do now, like in terms of infrastructure, it's clearly like L2s and Optimism in the Superchain. And in terms of, the builders and the markets we want to support, it's like where we see this technology being used in a real way, right? And like where we think it's going to have real long-term impact, and it's not, just being used as a speculative tool. And so that really led the decision. Obviously, there's a lot of metrics to back that up. If you look at kind of, I think, Consensus puts out great reports every year in terms of global adoption, and emerging markets are always like 6, 7 of the top 10 countries are always kind of emerging markets.
Every year. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like, another thing is that we're like, from my perspective, we're just getting to this point where the technology starts to be good enough for kind of normal apps to be used, right?
Yeah.
And you can look at, I mean, whether it's Polymarket or whether it's kind of like, Farcaster on Base, or, there's starting to be things, and maybe we're not 100% there yet, but these things are coming where it starts to be like very, like you can hardly tell between a Web 2 app and Web 3 app. I'm not saying we're quite there yet, but I do think that's coming short term.
But but you're bang on. But even like last year, like we really, you know what I mean? Like early 2024, there really wasn't much. Like at the end of last year, we finally started seeing those consumer apps. And that's, I've asked this question literally probably 200 times, Dominic. Like, what is going to be crypto's killer app? Like, we still need that Instagram, that Snapchat, that
Totally.
TikTok, that Robinhood, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Right now, the killer apps are still centralized exchanges. Like, what do normies have on their phone? A lot of normies have a Coinbase account, a Binance account. Like everyone in Argentina has, Binance, or they have Lemon Cash, right? Like that's what we need. Like I'm from Canada. I live in Toronto. Torontonians do not have anything on their account besides like maybe a BitBuy, which is like the biggest exchange in Canada. Like we don't have. There's nothing else.
Totally.
What do you think that's going to be? You think it's going to be social? You think it's going to be like a Robinhood? Like what's it going to be?
Well, just a few comments on that, right? So, I mean, one thing is that, like, obviously, I think what's very different in Web3 versus other technologies is that this is played out publicly where everybody can invest in it from day one, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, imagine, like, AI has been around for 30, 40 years, but it just became, like, mainstream 2-3 years ago because all of a sudden that killer app was there. But, like, everything else has been happening in the background for decades, right? And the internet was the same way. And even if you look at like, even if we've gotten spoiled now with how good our apps on our phone are, but like if you look at 10, 15 years ago, like Twitter was like 3 or 4 years old, Facebook was 6 years old. There was a ton of doubt about these things. Twitter was super awkward. Like people were not using it like they do, clunky. People were like, hey, I'm going to the gym, like, and like nobody would respond. And like, and Facebook, when they went public in 2012, 8 years after they had started working, there was so much skepticism. Is this business model going to work? The price tanked after they listed on the stock exchange. So like, I just think we've gotten a little like jaded in terms of what we expect. So that's just an overall comment. And the other comment is I do think, so I mean, this is not a unique answer, but I think in markets like Argentina or in Africa, you see that stable coins are that initial app, right? In
100%.
terms of payments, right? And obviously in the West, we don't need that. In Europe, United States, Canada, like in parts of Asia, you're not going to really need that. So it's not something that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But I think companies are starting to recognize it. I know that like SpaceX, for example, international companies that have to pay people around the world are starting to use stablecoins quite a bit. And locally, this is, like you see the same thing in Africa, right? In Africa, it's very common if you want to pay for something that they just say, oh, you can send me USDT on X, whatever. And so I do think that's kind of like the main, like that's the first kind of product market fit for Web3 in terms of a large scale. Obviously, we're still waiting for that kind of like cool application of like that we just all get addicted to and can't stop using. And what that's going to be. I mean, to be honest, what I think that's going to, I mean,
I feel like it's going to be X with something crypto-esque because
you think so?
That like, one, you can't bet against Elon. Like even my normie friends, though, most of my normie friends don't use X either. Like,
right.
It's so like crypto siloed. Like a lot of my tech friends use X because it is undoubtedly the best feed to gather information and it is the best news source. But like most normies and, like my parents and stuff, like my dad will take a rip on X maybe once a week just to see what's going on. But like, they're still watching mainstream news. But I don't know what it's going to be. And it's like, what could replace sort of that Instagram social layer dating app? Because Instagram is still the world's biggest dating app, whether you want to admit it or not. Like what would sort of change the payment rails? But no, we already really have solutions to that. Like, I don't know what it's going to be, but I do think we need that. Without it, we're still hooped, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do think, so I think you're right in the sense that like, I think whether it's X or whether it's, kind of something like WeChat in China or, something in a different, like just integrating payments again will obviously be one of them. I think what's interesting though, and maybe what you're really referring to is like, what will be the first killer app that's fully Web3 and maybe not payments, right? Because payments is just like an improvement, but like what does Web3 enable? I mean, there's a number of ways you can go there. Obviously, prediction markets is an interesting one that seems to be gaining traction just because, again, the fact that like it really does seem that Polymarket is really working. And that ties in a little bit of the speculation. It ties in something that's really useful, right? And the ability to determine futuristic outcomes by like a group mentality or group wisdom.
Super cool.
Yeah, it's just like an interesting thing that never really was possible before. But I think there's going to be a ton of unlocks like that, right? And I think that's kind of like in the same way that like even like in the tech bubble of 2001 or on the internet, like even at that time, you could not have imagined not just the mobile apps, but you could not have imagined that like X or YouTube would replace traditional media. And so I think, you're just it's really hard for us to think that far into the future. And that's why we like doing what we get to do, which is we get to support founders who are building really interesting use cases and, testing things out.
Well said there. We are getting a little tight for time. A couple more questions on Lisk here. The Superchain. It's super, super interesting. Just give us a quick little, like, I know you briefly touched on it a couple minutes ago, but walk me through the Superchain, why it's so powerful, just the interoperability, the scalability, and maybe just try to give like an explanation for normies. Because if I tried to explain this, it'd be a little tough for me. But again, it's so interesting how you get the best of base, you get the best of ARB, literally just, and the name itself is all world. So like, did you guys coin that? Like, walk me through the whole Superchain story there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so the Superchain story, as far as I know it, is, basically it started with a collaboration between Optimism and Base. And,
Gotcha.
Base basically doing what we were talking about at the beginning, right? Like we could go build a layer one. We're trying to bring our customer base on chain. We're really, serious about doing that. And in the end, they decided like, look, we would rather do something collective. And I don't know, again, the exact who said what to whom when, I'm not sure about, but like I know that was kind of the impetus of like, look, let's work together. We'll build with you. And like, let's create this idea of like other people can join in. And again, kind of like stay true to crypto values. We'll all contribute back some of the revenue we generate, and then we'll all work collectively on improving the OP stack and the Superchain's ability from UX standpoint, from liquidity standpoint, because there's so many things that are still needing to be improved for us to really get where we want to go with this technology, right? And if we keep competing against each other, again, it's a short-term sighted game. So that's kind of how it started. And like, we were one of the first chains to sign up for it. So now the one thing that gets a little bit confusing is that there's a lot of, so you can build on the OP stack and you can be part of the Superchain. Both are possible. It's not the same thing. And even within the Superchain, when we talk about the Superchain, and even Optimism talks about the Superchain now, it really refers to this interoperability set, which at the moment is about 7, 8, 9 chains, right? So it's like Lisk, OP Mainnet, Base, WorldChain, Unichain, Inc., Zora, Mode. And I think that's
a lot of the big boys,
right? A lot of the big boys. Sonium, that's the last one. Yeah. So like so it's most of the big boys right now. I mean, it's also what we've done there is that you had to agree to kind of keeping a vanilla version of the OP stack, right? And so that's what the reason of that, and it's not so vanilla anymore. We can get into that in a second, but like the reason for that is that, obviously to create the industry's first interoperability, you need to have similar infrastructure. Otherwise, if you have different block times and you have different security mechanisms, that's where interoperability has been such a challenge to reach at this point. And I think, to be honest, I think a lot of people are still sleeping on the Superchain because I think people have talked about interoperability forever. And so like they just go, yeah, Superchain, whatever. Like, I don't know, it's just another buzz term, but it is going to be the industry's first interoperability. And I think once that's live, like it's going to blow people away.
Yeah.
Because again, if I can just out the gate, right? Like if I can hold assets on Lisk, on my Lisk wallet, and I don't need to change networks and I can just go use an application on Base, like that starts to change the game, right? And then as an application builder, again, I can build a DEX or I can build a financial tool on Lisk, but the most liquidity for a certain pair is on OP Mainnet, and I can just route that pair through OP Mainnet, and it's going to settle back on Lisk in the same block. So it's going to feel like one chain.
Yeah.
And so basically what ends up being is like, imagine the Superchain as one chain instead of all these different chains, and each current L2 is just kind of like its own, little ecosystem within that chain.
Yeah.
And that starts to unlock, again, like from a builder perspective, we're not even sure what that unlocks. Again, in the same way that we're talking about Web3, it's like, if you can start to route different things through different chains and different applications on different chains, and they all settle back in a single block, like you can kind of start to think of new novel ways to build an app from the ground up, right? And so...
And that's going to feel more Web2-y. Like that's going to...
Probably, yeah,
exactly. It's going to be less clunky, yeah.
Yeah. So we're super excited about that. And I mean, just again, like just a recent example of why this is so powerful and like why I think people are sleeping on it and on Ethereum as a whole is, okay, so Unichain decided to launch a layer 2 a few months ago. They've been working with the OP team to create flash blocks, which are 200 millisecond blocks every 200 millisecond, right? So it's like twice as fast as Solana technically, right? And you can go into the details of Solana's in L1, so there's finality. There's a little bit of a difference there, but it just means it's going to be super fast. Base now announced yesterday that they're implementing that on testnet already. But again, these are the things that, like, because you're part of the Superchain, you're going to get that benefit. Like, so Lisk will get that benefit just by being part of the Superchain. And so, like, that's where, again, like, I think people are very short-sighted and like, oh, like Solana versus Ethereum. It's like Ethereum's this like massive ecosystem of people contributing together, right? And yeah, there's even competition within Ethereum. And so, but like, if you just put so many smart technical people and business people on the same side, like, it's just watch out, right? And I think that's, again, don't worry about the price so much at the moment. It'll catch up.
Well said there. What an episode, Dominic. Before we let you go, any news that you guys have? Again, this episode's going live in 4 days on Monday. I believe it's Monday the 3rd. But any news popping off?
I mean, if you're a builder in a high growth market, you know, we have great foundational programs. I mean, one of the things that we're focused on, right, and one of the things that we, you know, the builders in these markets have been they haven't been given enough priority by the Web3 companies. And so, and there's also just realities of, like, you know, while the talent of a builder in Africa is often on par, or, you know, a builder anywhere in the world, there's just access to not just the technology is there, but access to other programs, right? Like, whether it's an incubation program or whether it's a mentor or whether it's capital, like, that has not really been, that's not equal across the globe, let's say. And so we focus a lot on terms of, like, working with local partners, whether it's incubation programs, whether it's developer hub, et cetera, who provide additional values to builders and founders across the whole scale, kind of going from 0 to 1, right? And so, like, that's what we do a big portion of, because as we talked about now, the tech is kind of being built as part of the Superchain, and so that's kind of handled and we contribute to that. But then on the business side, like, we're very focused on providing value that's very localized, right? So, like, you know, each region it's its own approach, and working with the right people there locally. So again, like, if you're building in Argentina, if you're building in Africa, if you're building in Southeast Asia, we have great programs. Come check them out. And yeah, look forward to look ahead for interoperability to launch this year. We're super excited about that.
I love that. Last thing here, let us know where our listeners can find you personally, and of course, Lisk online and on socials.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, lisk.com is our website. Lisk HQ is the handle for Lisk. And you can find me at Dom Schwenter, SCHWENTER on X. And you can also just follow Lisk and you'll see my posts pop up there sometimes.
What an episode. Folks, what an episode with Dominic Schwenter, COO of Lisk, bringing the noise. We talked about the current market and the shit show we're in, and guys, don't worry, we are going to get out of this and we are going to be buzzing soon. We talked about the Ethereum Foundation, the Superchain, and of course, Ethereum's role in high growth markets, interoperability, you name it. Huge shout out to Dominic and the team for making this happen. If you guys enjoyed this one, and I hope you did, please do subscribe. It would mean the world to my team and I. Speaking of the team, love you guys. Thank you so much for everything. And back to the listeners, love you guys. Keep on growing those bags and keep on staying healthy, wealthy, and happy. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one. Ciao.